Thank you for meeting with me again, Acharya. And especially, I asked you that if you can just make this all men. And I know you talk a lot about women's liberation and furthering women's journey to liberation. And I have some stuff to talk about that I just feel more comfortable sharing when they're just guys. So thank you for agreeing to do that.
Welcome.
I guess my first question is, I know men and women are equal in their potential, in what they can achieve, and in accomplishments. But I also know that we have physical differences and differences in how we look at life. And yet we don't acknowledge that, and we say men and women are equal. It's almost like you're not supposed to say that men and women are physically different. Like, I don't have a uterus, and that's just a fact. So why do we hide this? Why do we pretend it doesn't exist?
The reasons are more on the historical side. Yes, there are differences, but in the past those differences have been blown up, exaggerated to make the false conclusion that one side is actually superior than the other, not different, not just different, but actually superior. So acknowledgement of differences had become an acknowledgement of superiority. So if this superiority, inferiority, and the game of domination and exploitation that goes with it had to be kept aside, one had to emphasize on the equality aspect of the two beings, the two genders. So that's the reason why there is so much emphasis on equality. But yes, I would agree that just as at one point or over a long period of time the differences were exaggerated, equally it is possible that today the equality aspect or the similarities are being exaggerated, and any exaggeration is a denial of fact and therefore not useful, not helpful, and against the truth. So yes, there are differences, and any sane person would readily agree that there do exist differences.
Is it okay if we talk about some of these differences?
Of course, that's what we are here for.
Thank you.
And that's what our 6 friends here are waiting for. Yeah? You insisted on an all-male crowd, and that's what we have got. So
I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if you guys feel the same way, please chime in. I just want to know that I'm not crazy when I say these things. So I've noticed in my interaction with women, there's some common themes, and I just don't know if something's wrong with me, or maybe this is just how it is, but I've noticed, for example, women will sometimes say something, but they'll do something completely different. If she wants something from me, she won't ask me directly, can I have X? It will be some sort of oblique hint. I've just noticed that, at least with my guy friends, we're like, just tell me what's up and we'll deal with it. But with women, I feel like I have to guess what they want. And if I don't guess exactly what they want, I'm in trouble. Like, I've done something wrong.
Most men would vouch they have had a similar experience. it happens. But how do you interpret it? Do you take it as a conclusion of a problem with an entire gender? Why does this thing happen? Why are many women, probably most women, reluctant to put things squarely upfront? Why do they deal so much in hints, in pointers, in imagery, in symbols? Why do they do that? Forget that they are a particular gender, forget the physicality. Go to the mind. Think of the mind, the consciousness that has to deal so much in hints. The kind of mind that does not want to be, probably cannot afford to be upfront. What kind of mind is that? And also, mind you, that kind of mind is found not only in women but also in several men. Maybe in women it's seen much more frequently, but it's not really the preserve of just women. Even men show these characteristics. When do people behave like that? You said women don't talk straight and they would say something and mean something else, and they are quick to get offended, and that they take things personally, that they are not really cool about life, right? You said with your guy friends you can just be very, very straight. With women you have to be probably tactful. Obviously we are generalizing here, but maybe that generalizing has a grain of truth in it. Why does somebody have to deal in symbols? Probably one feels a certain vulnerability. We are talking about the mind, we are talking about the human being. Let's keep the gender aside for a while, no? If I say something directly, I might be ridiculed. I want to keep a safe option open. So I'll say, I said it, I didn't say still. I said, no, I didn't say. Because I wanted to be secure, so I kept it ambiguous. Did I mean that? Probably I did, probably I didn't. It's very, very stuffy here. Very stuffy here. Do I mean we should go out? Yes, I do mean that, if you can appreciate that. But if you are someone who can't appreciate that, who is a bit insensitive, then I don't mean that. So I want to keep it deliberately ambiguous. It's a bit of a skill. Yeah? And it happens when you are insecure. You are forced to display this kind of behavior when there is fear. When there is fear. When you are just anxious, anything wrong can happen to you any moment. I don't want to run away with this. I don't want to throw conclusions on you. So keep interjecting. Take an extreme example, for example. Women have been under a heavy burden to carry the moral code of the society, right? She is the carrier of the society's morality. Now, how does she express that she needs to consume something? Because consumption in general is not a moral virtue. So if she has to express a basic desire, like dining out, like buying new clothes, watching a movie. Even in that, she just cannot display the full force of her desire. I'm not talking about 1% of the liberated population. Liberated not in the spiritual sense, but in the ideological sense, the liberal category. I'm not talking of them. They feel empowered to say and do whatever they want to. But in India, and in fact in most countries of the world still, including the US, compared to men, women are supposed to be more modest, right? So how do I flow freely? How do I express myself spontaneously? No? Spontaneous expression often involves a lot of passion, a lot of desire. And if I am young, it might also include the sexual desire. I'm not supposed to be open and direct and upfront and casual about it. I can't be. And if I can't be casual about something, read me right. I mean, these are words that can be taken in either way, but hear me rightly. If I can't be casual about something, often it will be difficult for me to be spontaneous. So what will I do? I'll keep layers of security. If I have to say A, I will say BCADE. Now that A has been armored from both the sides, and I am leaving it to your empathy and wisdom to decode that in BCADE the two sides have to be peeled off, and you have to come to A, the thing that I really meant to be known. When guys talk to each other and you mean to say A, you just say A. A. And if the fellow doesn't understand A, you heap him with abuses. That's what I said, A. Often a woman has to say A, she will say BCADE. You approach it from either side. You have to first unveil the truth. Remove the layers, and then you come to know what I want to say. Now this obviously appears amusing to us 8 guys sitting here, but I want to explore with a bit of empathy what makes a human being do that. Because it's quite time and energy inefficient to use 5 units of data where 1 would have sufficed. BCADE. And God save you if you thought she actually meant BCADE, or if you tried to decode and said, oh, so C is what you mean.
That's where I get stuck.
That's where you get stuck. If you say C, then you really don't see. So if you have to see A, you have to cross BC, you have to reach A.
There's no logical formula to decipher it.
That's what.
It also happens when you say, for example, when you say A, they listen B, or other way around.
Because you become so used to these codes and symbols that your faculty to hear straight just diminishes. Your ability to hear A as A just shrivels. Now I am used to saying BCADE when I mean A. You tell me ABCDE. You probably meant ABCDE. You probably meant A as the most important thing in ABCDE. But going by my own algorithm, if you tell me ABCDE, I will think that you mean C, because that's how my own algorithm runs. That's how my algorithm runs. So men therefore find women quite mysterious. What's going on? Nothing much really. The differences are exaggerated. Don't think of her as a body, which obviously she's not much of. She's as much of consciousness as we are, the men. So the basic drives are the same, the basic desires are the same, and the ultimate destination is the same. She has to be liberated just as we have to be. It's just that owing to the difference in physicality, the historical contour has been quite different. And that leads to all these situations which are sometimes funny, sometimes pretty tragic.
Acharya, but I have found that biology plays a very big role, at least from where I look at it, because she has this responsibility that she carries that we fail to appreciate. At least I fail to appreciate is the bearing a child part. Like that, the fact that she needs to have that constant reminder that she has a responsibility already there. So I think that insecurity comes from the fact that biologically they are designed to be protective and to averse danger. Men, on the other hand, because we do not carry inherently, you're not carrying any kind of liability with us.
No, you are. Wait. There is a difference in magnitude, obviously, but there is not a difference in dimension. She is carrying reproductive cells in her body and a system. You too are carrying a reproductive system in your body and reproductive cells. Just that the participation on that side is far deeper and longer. Your participation is relatively smaller, but your participation is equal in the sense that even you have to provide that cell. Without that, stuff is not going to happen. Now, if I ask you, carrying your reproductive system in your body, do you necessarily define yourself through your would-be kid? Do you do that?
I think the outlook towards the whole process or towards this matter from a man's perspective and a woman's perspective is pretty different. As in, I'm not sure how much importance I will give to the kid, but
No, but the logic that you are
that men talk to women and they flirt, right? Isn't it the same thing? They are not direct about it and they are trying to give.
exactly. That's what happens in situations of fear and uncertainty. You don't flirt with your wife. There's no uncertainty there, right? You don't flirt with your wife, but you flirt with your colleague. You flirt with strangers. You flirt with somebody you see in the party.
Yes.
Why? Because if you are direct, there can be consequences. You do not know who she is and what her attitude is. So you flirt because you are afraid and insecure.
So in that way, I'm being like a woman.
It also happens.
We all are like that because we all are fundamentally the mind, the consciousness. And you put the mind in a certain situation and it will react in the same way, irrespective of the gender, the species, the ethnicity, the age, or whatever.
It also happens in diplomatic statements, like one leader of one state never says I will attack direct.
Obviously, because
And
there is
they
fear
say in coded language.
and there is distrust. So there is a lot of diplomacy involved, and you require a long gestation period for trust to develop. When do you need trust the most? When things are sensitive or vulnerable the most. Otherwise, you can be just cavalier about it.
But what I think is that maybe you have certain situations in just what I have observed is that in many of the situations where if you put a man, a lot of petty issues maybe day to day, day in and day out, in everyday conversations, If you look at from a man's perspective, they won't find any kind of real objective in going in and using that sort of coded language. But with women, it's the norm.
It's a norm because it becomes a habit if you practice it over centuries. It becomes a deeply ingrained habit. What I'm asking you is it purely due to her physicality, or is there a huge amount of history to it?
And the history is caused by men.
No, the history
Making it harder for
women. The men have not been so prescient or all powerful that they can manage the flow of history. History is largely accidental. We cannot blame somebody for history. When you want to blame someone, you first of all have to know or assume that the fellow is conscious enough to be blamed. Now that turns the whole thing upside down. If somebody is to be blamed, then he has done something in quite unconsciously, and if the fellow has done something unconsciously, how can he be blamed?
Acharya, if you think from the point of view of history also, if we just try to connect the dots, if male history is different from female history, then the only thing different in them is their biology. If you go to the root, so the root has always been has to be somewhere in the biology.
No, it's not merely the biology, you see. It's also the technology, the stage you are in. The women you are talking of are the women of this century. Had we been having this conversation 200 years back, would you be referring to the same women? That woman would have been an entirely different thing, irrespective of the fact that her physicality would be the same as today's woman. So it's not merely physicality that determines the person, right? History is determined not merely by the fact that there are two genders, and there is so much else that's involved. A lot of freak accidents, that movement, the way mind has progressed in its conversation with the material. So all that is definitely there. See, do not discount the possibility that you can have, and we do have, as a matter of fact, very, very healthy women if they are brought up in the right way, free of disabling influences, educated rightly, empowered rightly. If there is a woman of that kind, would you still say these things about her? Maybe a little bit of womanly behavior would still be exhibited, but not to the extent we are used to seeing in women in general. On the contrary, if you manage to dig out, meet some woman who is heavily conditioned, born and brought up in a very diseased kind of patriarchal environment, not educated rightly, implanted with all kinds of wrong values and beliefs, then these things that we are talking of will be even more deeply evident in her case. She will not express herself straight for a moment. You cannot say, oh, she's a straight shooter, no nonsense, straight talker. You won't have that.
So you're saying that the behavior is actually a symptom of something else that's wrong. It's not caused because of her biology and gender.
Obviously. See, we all have, irrespective of whether we are males, females, we all have the few basic tendencies. one of the tendencies of self-preservation. That's what the ego always wants, to preserve itself, right? You don't want your opinions to be heard, you don't want your self-respect to be hurt. Now if I tell you that your respect is to be determined by your daintiness, not by your knowledgeability, not by your courage, not by your wisdom, but by your daintiness. You'd be extremely nervous if there is a spot on your gown, because that's what your grandmothers and mothers and fathers and neighbors and teachers have taught you. Daintiness is much more important than wisdom or courage. So you will be very finicky about that spot on your gown, especially if it's a party gown. So do not discount that fact. We began this conversation acknowledging that the biological differences are obviously real. We cannot just keep shouting equality, equality. There are differences and we better acknowledge them. But then now what we want to investigate is whether those differences are actually as big as sometimes we want to believe. So my assertion here would be that no, those differences are amplified by history and by the conditioning that we still give to the girl. Otherwise you won't see those differences to the extent that you see. Ignorance starts from the body itself.
A woman is born, but gendering is something that is a
Even in a well-educated and spiritually liberated woman, the desire for a kid would be probably relatively larger compared to that in a man. What we want to talk of is whether the compulsive desire to keep the kid in the family at the center of her life is necessary. These things are absent in your life. Fearlessness, love, truth. When the relationship has a lot of love, then you're not afraid to be blunt because you know the other one will understand. But when the most important values are missing and there's a lot of fear and there is a chronic need for security, then you don't open up. If we indeed are caged consciousnesses yearning for freedom, then neither the womanly values nor the manly ones take us to our liberation.